There is a book that the New Testament quotes directly by name as prophecy, and it is not in your Bible. Jude, chapter 1, verse 14. The author names Enoch, the seventh, from Adam, and then quotes him speaking about the judgment of the world. That quotation does not come from Genesis. It does not come from anything in the Hebrew canon. It comes from a text called First Enoch, chapter 1, verse 9, and the wording matches so closely that no serious scholar disputes the source. So a book the earliest Christians treated as prophecy sits outside the canon today, while the letter quoting it sits inside. That book contains something almost nobody who talks about it has ever actually read. Across chapters 7, 8, 80, 98, and 99, First Enoch lays out a sequence, not a list of disasters, a sequence of what a specific figure does when he begins his work in the final generation. 7 stages, each described with a procedural detail that reads less like apocalyptic poetry and more like a case summary. Enoch does not use the word Antichrist. That word appears nowhere in the text, and anyone who tells you otherwise has not opened it. But every element that the later Christian tradition assigned to that figure, the deception, the altering of law and time, the blasphemy, the false wonders, appears in Enoch first, in sequence, centuries before the New Testament was written. In the next 20 minutes you will see all 7 stages, in the order Enoch gives them, with chapter and verse. And you will see why the third one is the stage that changes the entire reading, because the third one is not waiting. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of the 7-stage sequence the church left out of the canon, every chapter and verse in the Ge'ez text where each stage appears. The passages are H. Charles shortened in his 1906 English edition alongside what the Ethiopic manuscripts actually say, and the Council of Laodicea's own canon list in its own wording with the line where the decision was recorded. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now, let's continue. Start with what this book actually is, because almost everything said about it publicly is wrong in one direction or the other. First, Enoch is not a single work. It is 5 separate compositions bound together, and they were written centuries apart. The Book of the Watchers occupies chapters 1 through 36 and is the oldest layer. The Book of Parables runs from 37 to 71. The astronomical book covers 72 through 82. The Epistle of Enoch closes it out from 91 to 108. For most of Western history, that text existed only as a rumor. Church fathers quoted it. Nobody in Europe had a copy. Then in 1773, a Scottish traveler named James Bruce returned from Ethiopia carrying 3 manuscripts in Ge'ez, the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, which had never stopped treating Enoch as scripture and still counts it in its canon today. Charles produced the Standard English translation in 1906. Everyone assumed the Ethiopic version was a late medieval invention. Then came 1947. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls recovered from the caves at Qumran were Aramaic fragments of Enoch, catalogued today as 4Q201 through 4Q212. 11 separate manuscripts, some of them carbon dated to the 2nd century before Christ. The Aramaic matched the Ethiopic. A text everyone had written off as a medieval fantasy turned out to be older than most of the New Testament, and it had been copied and recopied at Qumran more often than several books that made the final cut. Joseph Milik published the Qumran Enoch material in 1976, nearly 3 decades after discovery. That delay is not a conspiracy by itself, since scroll publication was slow across the board. But the effect is real. For 30 years, the physical proof that Enoch was ancient sat in storage, while the standard commentaries kept calling it late. Now the part that matters for what follows? The book was not banned in a single dramatic vote, whatever you have heard. What happened is quieter and, honestly, more effective. Around the year 363, the Council of Laodicea issued a canon list, and Enoch is simply not on it. Jerome, assembling the Latin Vulgate a few decades later, classed it among the Apocrypha. Augustine addressed it directly in City of God, Book 15, and argued that its antiquity was exactly the reason it could not be trusted, because a text that old could not be verified. There was no bonfire and no decree, just a name left off a list, and then 400 years of copyists who stopped making copies. That is how a book actually disappears. Tertullian, writing before all of this, defended Enoch openly and argued it survived the flood. He lost that argument. The Ethiopian church never received the memo, which is the only reason the complete text exists at all. So, 7 stages. Before laying them out, the honest framing, because the framing is where most videos on this subject fall apart. Enoch is not describing a single named individual in the way a modern reader expects. The Aramaic and Ge'ez both describe the actions of what the text calls the deceiver and the exalted one, sometimes singular, sometimes collective. Mainstream scholarship, and George Nicholsburg's commentary is the most thorough statement of it, reads these passages as coded critique of the writer's own political moment. Hellenistic rulers, a corrupted priesthood, 2nd century Judea. That reading is reasonable and it accounts for a great deal. What it does not account for is why the actions are given in a fixed order, why the order is repeated across 3 separate compositions, written generations apart, and why each stage is described by its mechanism rather than its perpetrator. Enoch never tells you who. He tells you what is done, and in what sequence. Stage 1. The rewriting of the words. Chapter 98, verse 15. Woe to those who write down lying and godless words, for they write down their lies that men may hear them and act foolishly toward their neighbor. Read that again slowly, because it is stranger than it looks. The first move is not violence, and it is not political, it is textual. Someone writes something down, incorrectly and deliberately, and the corruption spreads because people read it. Chapter 104 extends it. Enoch says that in the coming time, men will alter and pervert the words of righteousness, and write books in their own names. Not destroy books, write them, adding to the pile until the true text cannot be separated from the counterfeit by anyone who is not already an expert. That is a description of an information attack, and it is the opening move. Notice what it implies about sequence. Nothing that follows in the list works unless this happens first. You cannot alter the law until you have altered the record of the law. You cannot change the appointed times until the text that fixes those times has been made unreliable. Enoch puts corruption of the written record at position 1 because everything downstream depends on it. Stage 2. The altering of the appointed times. This is chapter 80, and it is the passage that most surprises people who read Enoch for the first time. Verses 2 through 8 describe a period in which the natural order comes apart on a schedule. The seasons will arrive late. The fruits of the earth will be withheld. The rain will be restrained. The moon will alter its order and not appear at its proper time. The stars will change their courses and not appear at the seasons prescribed for them. Then verse 7 delivers the line that makes the passage land. And many chiefs of the stars shall transgress the order appointed, and shall alter their orbits and tasks. The astronomical book, chapters 72 through 82, is the most technical section in Enoch. It is a calendar document. It specifies a 364-day solar year, divided into 4 seasons of 91 days, producing a year where every date falls on the same weekday permanently. The Qumran community used exactly this calendar. It is one of the strongest links between Enoch and the group that preserved it. And chapter 82, verses 4 through 6, contains a direct warning. Enoch says those who do not reckon the year according to this system will be wrong about the days, and the reckoning will be corrupted, and the years will be confused. So stage 2 is not weather. Stage 2 is the deliberate substitution of a false measure of time for a true one, which produces a population that observes the wrong days without knowing they are wrong. Before we move on to the third stage, stop for a second. What you just heard about the altering of the appointed times is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Ge'ez of chapters 80 and 82. The 364-day reckoning. The transgressing chiefs. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back. Because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. Stage 3. The return of the taught crafts. This is the one the title promised, and this is where the reading stops being about the future. Chapters 7 and 8 of the Book of the Watchers describe the original transgression. 200 beings descend on Mount Hermon. But the crime Enoch dwells on is not the descent, and it is not the offspring. Chapter 8 is a curriculum. Enoch names the instructors and specifies what each one taught. Azazel taught the making of swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and he showed them the metals of the earth and the art of working them. He also taught the making of bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and the use of costly stones and coloring tinctures. Amezarach taught enchantments and the cutting of roots. Barakijal taught astrology. Kokabel taught the constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds. Arachiel taught the signs of the earth. Sariel taught the course of the moon. And in chapter 69, verses 8 through 11, one more. Penemu taught mankind the bitter and the sweet, and taught them the art of writing with ink and paper. Enoch adds a line that translators have argued about for a century. For men were not created for such a purpose, to give confirmation to their good faith with pen and ink. Look at what is on that list. Metallurgy and weapons manufacture, chemical alteration of the human appearance, pharmacology, which is what the cutting of roots means, prediction of celestial and atmospheric behavior, and the recording of language in a permanent transferable form. That is not a list of magic spells. Every single item is a real technology, and every single one of them is a foundational technology. Enoch's complaint is never that these things do not work. His complaint, stated in chapter 8 verse 2 and again in chapter 16, is that they were delivered ahead of the moral capacity to hold them by teachers who were not authorized to deliver them. Now the stage 3 claim, stated precisely. Enoch says the judgment on the watchers bound the teachers. Chapter 10 describes Azazel bound hand and foot and cast into darkness at Dudael. What it does not say anywhere is that the teaching was recalled. The instructors are removed. The curriculum stays. And chapter 16, verse 3, gives the mechanism for what happens next. You have been in heaven, but all the mysteries had not yet been revealed to you, and you knew worthless ones, and these in the hardness of your hearts you have made known to the women, and through these mysteries women and men work much evil on earth. Made known. Past tense, permanent. Enoch's position is that the knowledge cannot be ungiven. So the third stage is not an event that arrives, it is the point at which the full curriculum is operating without any of the restraint that was supposed to accompany it. Metallurgy scaled into industrial weapons production. Chemical and surgical alteration of the body as a consumer market. Pharmacology as a global industry. Atmospheric and celestial prediction as routine infrastructure. And writing, Penemu's contribution, expanded into a system where any claim can be recorded, duplicated, and distributed faster than it can be checked. Which loops directly back to stage 1. Here is where intellectual honesty is required, so let me state the counter-argument at full strength. A historian would say this reading is unfalsifiable. Any list of ancient technologies will appear to describe the present, because those technologies never stopped being used. Enoch was cataloging the crafts of his own era and condemning them, and reading modern industry into a 2nd century BCE text says more about the reader than the text. That is a strong objection, and it is not easily dismissed. The only thing it does not address is the ordering. Enoch does not present these crafts as in grab bag. He presents them as a sequence with a stated consequence, placed in a document that predicts the corruption of written records and the falsification of calendars first, in that order, before the crafts return. A list of period technologies would not come with a dependency chain. Stage 4. The measuring. Chapter 61 opens with angels given long cords, and they go toward the north to measure. Chapter 98, verse 8, states that all your unrighteous deeds are written down every day until the day of your judgment. Chapter 104, verse 7, repeats it. Your sins are not hidden, and they are written down every day. The consistent image across 3 separate compositions is enumeration, not punishment. Counting. Something is measuring, continuously, and the record accumulates before any verdict is issued. Enoch treats the counting itself as one of the stages, which is a strange thing to do unless the counting is understood to be an instrument rather than a consequence. And the detail he keeps returning to is that the subject does not know. Chapter 104, verse 8, says that men sin and think their sins are not investigated and not recorded. Enoch swears that everything is being observed and that the observation cannot be concealed by those doing it. So the 4th stage has 2 halves. Something measures continuously, and the measured population operates under the assumption that it does not. Enoch orders it deliberately. The instruments arrive, then the counting begins, and the counting is only possible because the instruments arrived. He never explains the connection. He simply refuses to reverse the order in any composition where the sequence appears. Stage 5. The Accumulation. Chapter 94, verses 6 through 8. Woe to those who build unrighteousness and lay deceit as a foundation, for they shall be suddenly overthrown. Woe to you who acquire silver and gold in unrighteousness, and say, we have become rich with riches and have possessions. Chapter 97, verse 8, is more specific. Woe to you who acquire silver and gold not in righteousness, and say, we have become exceedingly rich, and have acquired everything we desired. The word Enoch keeps using is foundation. The wealth is not the sin in itself. The wealth becomes the base on which the next structure is built, and the structure is the point. Chapter 97, verses 9 and 10, finishes the thought. Enoch says the rich shall not remain, and their riches shall be a testimony against them. That is not a warning about greed. It is a statement that the accumulation itself becomes evidence in the preceding described one stage earlier. That is the part of stage 5 that gets missed. Enoch has already told you, in stage 4, that everything is being written down. Stage 5 is what gets written down. The two stages are a single mechanism split across two positions in the list, and the accumulation is meaningful only because the record exists to hold it. He is describing leverage, wealth gathered by deceit, compiled into a permanent record, held by whoever controls the record. Stage 6. The house divided. Chapter 100, verses 1 and 2. In those days, in one place, the fathers and sons shall smite one another. Brother shall fall in death with brother, until there flows a stream from their blood. A man shall not withhold his hand from his son, nor from his son's son, to slay him. Chapter 99, verse 5, adds that women shall abandon their children, and that those who bore them shall cast them off. Enoch is not describing war between nations. He is describing the collapse of the smallest unit, the family, from the inside. And he places it at stage 6, after the record is corrupted, after time is falsified, after the crafts return, after the counting begins, after the wealth is stacked. It is presented as the result of everything above it, not as an independent catastrophe. There is a logic to that placement. A family is held together by shared memory, shared time, and shared obligation. Corrupt the record and the shared memory goes. Falsify the calendar and the shared time goes. Hand out the crafts without restraint, and the obligation becomes optional. Stack wealth on top of all three, and the remaining bonds are financial. By the time Enoch reaches stage 6, there is nothing structural left holding the unit together, and he describes the result in the most physical language in the entire book. A stream from their blood, a man who will not withhold his hand from his own grandson. Chapter 99, verse 9, explains why this stage arrives so late. Enoch says their eyes shall be blinded through the fear of their hearts. Fear, not malice. The collapse at stage 6 is what frightened people do to each other when every structure above them has already failed. Stage 7. The hard words. Chapter 5, verse 4. You have not been steadfast, nor done the commandments of the Lord, but you have turned away and spoken proud and hard words with your impure mouths against his greatness. Chapter 91, verse 7, gives the full form. When sin and unrighteousness and blasphemy and violence in all kinds of deeds increase, and apostasy and transgression and uncleanness increase, a great chastisement shall come from heaven. The final stage is verbal and it is public. Not a hidden corruption, a stated one. The claim is made openly, from a position that has been built by the 6 stages beneath it, and Enoch's language is consistent. Hard words, proud words, words against his greatness. The sequence terminates in a declaration. That detail connects Enoch to everything the later tradition built on top of it. Paul's man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians is defined by a statement, by sitting in the temple and declaring himself. Daniel's horn in chapter 7 speaks great things. The figure in Revelation 13 is given a mouth, speaking blasphemies. All of those were written after Enoch, which had already placed the climax in speech and given it a position number. Enoch also tells you why the declaration comes last rather than first. Chapter 98, verse 11, describes those who have become hardened in heart, and says the statement is only possible once the hardening is complete. Made at stage 1, the claim would be rejected outright. Made at stage 7, after the record is unreliable and the calendar is wrong and the crafts are everywhere and the counting is normal and the wealth is entrenched and the family is gone, there is no longer anything left in the population capable of recognizing it as a claim at all. That is the entire argument of the book, compressed into one structural choice. The blasphemy is not the beginning of the process. It is what the process was building toward, and it is only sayable at the end. Which brings us to the part of Enoch that almost nobody quotes, and it is the reason the whole sequence has a location in time, chapter 93, verses 1 through 10, running into chapter 91, verses 11 through 17, contains what scholars call the apocalypse of weeks. Enoch divides all of history into 10 weeks. Each week is an era with an identifying event. The first week, Enoch himself. The second, the flood. The third, Abraham. The fourth, the law at Sinai. The fifth, the building of the temple. The sixth, the temple burned and the chosen scattered. The 7th week is where the text stops being historical. Chapter 93, verse 9. And after that, in the 7th week shall an apostate generation arise, and many shall be its deeds, and all its deeds shall be apostate. Then verse 10, and at its close shall be elected the elect righteous of the eternal plant of righteousness, to receive sevenfold instruction concerning all his creation. Weeks 8, 9, and 10 follow, and they are judgment, not history. The Qumran community read themselves as living in the 7th week. They believed the apostate generation was the one around them, and that they were the elect at its close. They were wrong about the timing. They were not wrong that the 7th week has no stated length. And that is the structural feature of Enoch that survives every skeptical reading of it. The text places the entire 7-stage sequence inside an era it refuses to date. An era, it says, arrives after the temple is destroyed. And it describes that era by one characteristic. The deeds are apostate, and there are many of them. So here is where this actually lands. The Book of Enoch does not name an Antichrist. It never claims to. What it does is describe, in a fixed and repeated order, 7 things that happen when a deceiving power begins its work, and it insists that the order is not arbitrary. The record is corrupted first. Time is falsified second. The forbidden crafts return third and are never withdrawn. The counting begins. The wealth stacks. The family fractures. And then the words are spoken out loud. Stages 1 and 2 are arguable. Reasonable people read them as ancient polemic and leave it there. Stage 3 is not arguable in the same way, because stage 3 is not a prediction of an event. It is a claim about a condition, and the condition is that the entire curriculum of chapter 8 is running at scale with the instructors long gone and no mechanism anywhere for taking it back. Metallurgy, alteration of the body, the cutting of roots, the reading of the sky, and ink and paper multiplied past the point where any of it can be verified by the people receiving it. Enoch's claim was never that these things would appear. His claim was that they had already been given, permanently, to a species that was not ready, and that everything downstream of that gift follows in order. The Aramaic fragments sit in Jerusalem under catalog numbers anyone can look up. The complete Gaze text sits in Ethiopian church collections, and in Michael Knibb's 1978 Oxford edition, and Ephraim Isaac's 1983 translation. Jude quoted it as prophecy. Laodicea left it off a list. Jerome filed it under Apocrypha. Augustine argued it was too old to trust. And the sequence it describes has been sitting in chapters 7, 8, 80, 98, and 100 for 2,200 years, in the same order, waiting for someone to check how far down the list we are.